just noticed something that I've got to take care of. So I accidentally set this stream up on the Phoenician Sailor channel. And I deleted it. But it looks like it's still showing as active over there. So let me take care of that. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Beyond the Double Red Doors. I'll tell you, I don't really understand how that happened. I mean, I did a stream a few days ago over there, so I had to, set the key. But once I noticed that, I undid it, or I killed it, or I thought I did. Apparently, I did not. Now, I would be shocked if it's streaming in both places. It's definitely not streaming in both places at once. That would be impossible. That would just be crazy. So let me take care of this, and then I'll get back to y'all in 1 second. I'm just gonna do this here. I'm not gonna go into a You'll just hear some mouse clicking in stuff. Well, looks like it might have, no. You, go away. Actions, delete forever. One video is about to be deleted. I understand that deleting is permanent and cannot be undone. Delete forever. All right, it's saying can leave the stream while that's happening. So that's leave the screen while it's happening. So I'm going to assume that that went ahead and happened, or is in the process of happening, and that we are just here, which is where we're meant to be doing that. Cheers. So there's a couple changes that y'all might notice. You might not notice. They're not that big, but they're big. They're big for me. Like I feel like I'm constantly trying to make small quality of life changes for these streams. With my sort of train of thought being, as I've said before, the easier I can make these, the less of an excuse I have not to do them. And therefore, hopefully, the more I actually do them. What I have now are what I recently got. You can see are these little in-ear monitors, which means I don't have to wear, these giant things, and I can still get a non-laggy. The problem with using any kind of Bluetooth in-ear monitors is the lag. But now I don't have the lag. I think I can hear everything that's going on. Sounds okay to me. If it doesn't sound okay to you, please let me know. The other thing is I'm not wearing my glasses. So I've been told that I'm the kind of person that really kind of needs to accessorize. Especially my eyes tend to always be red and bloodshot. And that's not because of any drug use. It's just the way my eyes are. Jesus, being so judgmental. However, that is a good segue right into quiet on the audio. You're quiet on the audio, Q. What would I do without Q? All right, I'm gonna boost the audio, but I kind of feel like it's pretty loud. So if it needs to be any louder than that, I don't know. Seems loud to me. Well, I'm wearing contacts, so I can see. I can see better when I wear contacts, but I notice that the older I get, the more difficult it is to wear contacts for prolonged periods of time. I'm sorry, Bobby. I meant to give you credit. Well, got people saying it's too loud, people saying it's too soft. And guess what? Pink eyes with the blue iris. That's right. And my this is the color on this is a little bit weird. My lips are not this red. It almost looks like I've applied some sort of, what's that stuff that what do they call it? What's it? It's like it reddens your lips. Something like that. Anyway. What's the other quality of life? Actually, the other quality of life improvement I made, I ended up scrapping at the last minute. I got a match set of microphones. I was going to do stereo here so I could do, some but when I set it up, it was causing all kinds of issues. And it was just over complex. I don't think I think it's fine to do ASMR videos and do some small amount of ASMR here, but it's not going to be in a stereo. So how are you all doing? Let's see who we got. Look, it's the Michael, Colorful Dreams, Pavi, Lady Nervar, of course Q, pointing out the audio long before Pavi ever did. Ramona, Jonathan Marsh. Do I know that name? Nicholas Wynn, or Nicholas Wyman. I recognize you. Hopefully not. Hopefully not anymore. Oh, this is the way that you told me that the audio was too low? By yelling at me to speak up? Back-to-back alley streaming. It's the difference between, 30 viewers, between 20 and 30 viewers, 20 and 40 viewers, and like 50 and 60 viewers. It's not that big a difference. Somebody mentioned some effing substances. Hello, old man Hiver. Nacht Hexen, how are you doing? Butterfly Composer, it's good to see you, as always. So, yeah, what I wanted to talk about tonight was Alley Serendipity. Yo, how's it going? Whispering Wolf, Grace's Grove, good to see all of you. Seabreeze Gaming. How old? Oh, no, I don't want to know how old you are. But I had this issue as well. It took me a while before I could get comfortable with contacts. But eventually I did. Problem is, glasses are really, really tough to I mean, they ruin your peripheral vision. They can give you a headache. They are, I mean, if you get the right glasses, they can kind of help with the shape of your face a little bit. And they can distract from things like, redness around your eyes. But apart from that, whatever. Well, Q, I think it's time to try them again. If somebody had made me try contacts when I was 10 years old, I would have freaked the fuck out, Try it again. So what I wanted to talk about tonight, and I'm hopefully going to do some calls and stuff. If you're interested, you want to talk, I still want to do, if you have video and we haven't spoken yet before. However, at some point, I mean, there's, 27 people watching the stream, probably going to have to circle back, and that's fine. Well, it's not always magnified, butterfly composer. Sometimes it makes your eyes look smaller. Depends on if you're nearsighted or farsighted, doesn't it? It also can depend on the angle which you're looking through the lens. Anyway, I almost didn't stream tonight. I wasn't really feeling it. But sometimes you can't always be feeling it. Right, Beaky? Oh, nope. Oh, I'm not gonna stream. I'm not gonna stream tonight. Nope. Nope. Not happening. Don't feel up to it. Touch noses. My son will not, he doesn't like kissing at all. Like, he won't kiss me on the cheek or anything like that. He will touch noses. So if I say, give me a kiss, or let me give you a kiss, he'll say noses. So, gotta obey the demanding 6-year-old. So if you want to talk, a dead symbol at gmail.com. Shoot me an email. It says, I want to talk, and then we can talk. I'd like to guide us to substance abuse and the stigma around substances, especially those that are not abused. The sort of there's a lot of, and whenever I talk about this, people always think I'm talking about pot. I'm not talking about pot. I think there are a lot of medications that get a bad name. Legally prescribed medications that can get a bad name. I think almost any pharmaceutical can be used in a therapeutic way. Obviously, arsenic is not a pharmaceutical, right? But I think a lot of vilified pharmaceuticals can still be used in a therapeutic way. It's up to the person who's using them. I did notice something today I wanted to bring up. There was, they found a kid today, a 9-year-old kid in Tennessee. He ran away from his house because his parents were having an argument. And for 3 days, he was missing in the Tennessee wilderness. They found, I think his name was like Jason. Let's see, I think I have it up. No, I don't have it up here. So for 3 full days, did this finally delete? It still says it's deleting. Jeez. Okay, it's gone. Good. Excellent. Great. Wonderful. So happy about that. Anyway, I think his name was like Jason Borman or something like that. Name's not important. Here's what's important, right? The kid, it's cold in Tennessee right now. The kid uh, went almost a full mile away in the woods from his house because his parents were arguing. I can assume it was pretty violent arguing, or he wouldn't have gone that far away. But for 3 days, he lived in the woods. And when they found him, he was living under this tarp. And you can see there's like a little T-brace there up against a tree and a tarp. So I don't know if any of you have watched the show Alone or Survivor Man. Well, Alone's better because Survivor Man, obviously, Les Stroud knows what he's doing. But I watched like all of the Alones, or a lot of the Alones, not everyone. Ardra and I watched a lot of them. And it was very interesting to see like the approaches different people would have. Like some people were very, very fixated on making the greatest sort of shelter that they could and making literally like a cabin in the woods. Like you see right now they have like those cabins, those build your own A-frames for under $20,000. You can have your own little A-frame with windows along one full wall, and you can put beds in it and stuff like that. So you have the contestants on Alone who will really, I think, over-index on making a nice looking house that they can live in with a fireplace, and a chimney, and a place to dry the meat from the animals that they never are able to successfully hunt. But then there are some people, and one of the people who won, and I forgot his name, but he was young. He was a young guy. No, 1 second. He was a young guy. Oh. He was a young guy, and he built it like the worst shelter. It looked pretty much like this, except more tarp, and he had more time to put stuff around it, but it wasn't that different from this. I think he ended up winning. I think he didn't win. I think he went on twice, and then the first time he went on, he didn't win, but the second time he did. He was just like a really jolly. He had a really good attitude. It's interesting because like you when you watch something like that, when you watch a show like Alone, and this is something that we were doing when we were watching it, we were always trying to bet on like, okay, this person's going to go the distance, this person's not going to go the distance, and you get like kind of an idea of in your head, you're kind of like, I think this person could survive physically, but psychologically they're in trouble. Or I think this person seems to have a good attitude, but like the guy I'm talking about, whose shelter didn't look that different from this, he had a really good attitude. He couldn't do anything. Like he was living off mice. This is before like there was a season where the hantavirus basically meant they couldn't eat mice. But he was basically living off mice. And he had some extra weight on before the season started. I kind of feel like that's a bit of an unfair advantage if you're going in there with a high body mass index versus like there was this ultra, yoga master, naturalist, survivalist, who I always thought, and he was also on twice, and I always thought he was going to win because he could do pretty much anything, and he had a good attitude. But actually, his attitude was like a little too good. It was like a little kind of manic. And it's so strange to watch the sort of the psychological torment that these people go through over the 30-day, between like 30 and 50 days that they're out there. Some of them tap out on like the third day. But the torment that they go through, and this guy that I'm talking about, although he was like an incredibly skilled survivalist, and he was catching fish, and he was like drying out fish, and he had all this fish in his tent. Meanwhile, he'd lost like 50% of his body weight, and he looked like he was about to die. Like he looked like a skull. And he wasn't eating the fish because he was like, no, I ration. I give myself one fish a day. But he was at a calorie deficit every day. And they ended up pulling him because of how low his weight got. But anyway, the guy who won made a shelter that looked kind of like this. So the fact that a 9-year-old went out into the Tennessee wilderness, he's by a creek. Like he had the wherewithal to say, I'm going to set up my tent by a creek. And apparently he found the tarp. So yeah, a 9-year-old was able to do this. So, I mean, yeah, sure, you can be... Why do I have a window within a window here? I don't want this window within a window. What was it? Well, that made me lose my train of thought. Yeah, 3 days is not 40 days, and obviously they time these things so they go out there late summer, early autumn, so that it turns to winter usually and becomes harder and harder to survive. They're all like pulling in 3 or 4 fish every day, and then near the end of their experience, they're trying to break through the ice. I was not great. I was not great at picking a winner, but meh. Well, they did it. I didn't read everything that was said here, but they did one where it was like there was pairs of people, and they would drop one person off 10 miles away from the other person. So one person had all the supplies and was building the home base, and the other person had to hike to them. And that also added like a little bit of drama, because there was always, like, in every one of the pairs, except for this one Canadian pair of twins who I think ended up winning that season, there was always one of the people was kind of like, maybe we should tap out, huh? Maybe if we don't get any more food tomorrow, maybe we should tap out. You think? And the other person maybe wasn't quite prepared to tap out. So there was always like an imbalance. And there were a couple of people who got injured and had to get pulled because one of the pair got injured. And you could tell there was like a little bit of like for the cameras, like, I'm just glad that my best friend is okay. I don't care about the $500,000. Bullshit. So anyway, I don't know what, yeah, well, I know what got me off talking about that was, I thought it was amazing, wonderful that they found this child. Hopefully CPS is doing a little bit of investigative work into what would cause a 9-year-old to be so dismayed with the state of their home life that he would, run away like that, put his life in jeopardy. So I have this box full of props here, because look, that's how I know it's props. Otherwise, I would look at this and I'd be like, what the hell am I looking at? I'm just going to do that with the stereo mics, but not everything always works. Sometimes things fall apart. The important thing is to endure. So drugs. Everybody on the internet, with anybody with internet access at this point, is probably aware of who Jordan Peterson is, and possibly aware of the rather horrific series of events that he has had to endure trying to come off benzodiazepines. So I'm not a Jordan Peterson fan, right? Like I will sometimes listen to almost like hate watching, but it's not quite, because sometimes he makes some decent points, but then, every couple of minutes, then he'll just say something completely, in my opinion, off base. And who am I to, no, you know what? No, there's no, he doesn't get any special dispensation because of either his fame or his, the fact that he's a clinical psychologist, which he'll remind you of every time he's talking to you. If he gets credit for anything, it's the way he sits. I love the way he sits. I sit like that. I don't sit like that right now because I kind of have to be near a mic, but if you see me at work, I'm always kind of curled up. I have trouble staying like that. But anyway, so the Jordan Peterson, clinical psychologist, has some, apparently he's liberal, but he has some, in my opinion, right, some pretty backwards views on, or progressive. He has this sort of knee-jerk reaction against modernism, or postmodernism, which I think postmodernism. I think postmodernism is actually pretty neat. It can be a little self-indulgent, right? You have to, like all movements, you have to pick the cream. You have to kind of skim the cream and try to ignore the chaff. But, if you've ever enjoyed a Charlie Kaufman movie, you might be a postmodernist. Anyway, the guy was on clonazepam for anxiety. He was taking it every day. He was taking 0.25 milligrams of clonazepam 3 times a day. Then I guess his situation worsened and his psychiatrist upped the dose. He doesn't say to what, but I would assume that he probably upped the dose to 0.5 milligrams 3 times a day. Drugs affect everyone differently. You can't say that, because somebody was taking 1.5 milligrams of clonazepam a day, that would have the same effect if somebody else was taking that. And there's been no shortage of people who have come out and said basically like Stevie Nicks has been like, I've tried every hardcore drug there is in my life, but the hardest thing I ever did was coming off of clonazepam, which is, Klonopin. So, for me, Klonopin saved my life and continues to save my life. In that it allows me to function it allows me to be a high functioning human being. So I'm not going to say how much I take or whatever, but it's prescribed to me by a psychiatrist and has been for some time. And it's not really meant, obviously, as most people will, I'm sure, point out, it's not meant to be a long-term treatment for anxiety or depression. However, if something works, it works. And if something doesn't work, it doesn't work. And if something is labeled to work for one thing, but it works, I don't know why I'm moving around this mic as if it's a stereo mic, but it works for something else, then it works for something else. So everything is poison eventually, right? Take enough of anything and it's poison. I'm not sure. And like I said, I realize like you can't just say, well, I took this dose, this other person took this dose, therefore we had roughly equivalent effects. And I have gone through periods where I've stopped taking clonazepam. I'm just bringing him up as an example of like the vilification of benzodiazepines. He went to a clinic that tried to sort of basically make him stop cold turkey by putting him in a propofol-induced coma. So propofol, okay, in case you don't know, propofol is what Michael Jackson basically was taking every day and eventually what killed him. It's an anesthetic. Anesthesiologists use it to put you under for general anesthesia. It's a wonderful feeling. It's not something you want to be doing every day. And it doesn't seem like putting yourself in a medically induced coma to wean you off of benzodiazepines. That doesn't seem like the best idea in the world. And then a bunch of other stuff happened. He ended up contracting COVID. He had akathisia, I think it is, which I think a lot of people suffer from also, probably not to the degree that he was suffering. But anyway, he went through a whole lot of crap, right? And eventually emerged out of the other side of this tunnel and is now visibly weaker, visibly sort of seems to have, his voice is weaker. He seems physically much weaker. And he has so far not sort of come out and said, he hasn't tried to just kind of pin this on benzos, right? But I guess I fear that kind of vilification when it is such an effective treatment for so many people. And there are other medications that can have similar effects. Some of these are off-label, right? They're not meant to do what they do, but for some people they work. So what I'm curious about, well, Lady Nervar, yeah, I mean, his family was involved, and also his wife got cancer. 2019 was not a good year for that guy. But anyway, yeah, maybe. You can go cold turkey or you can go hot buffalo. Okay, but see, this is what I'm talking about, Q. You're terrified of benzos because of what happened to him. You shouldn't be. I mean, first of all, there's a giant spectrum between taking... all this is obviously done under all of this should be done, one, under the supervision of a doctor who is actually acting in your best interests and not their best interests. I think it's very difficult once you reach a certain level of celebrity to find a doctor who can be objective about your treatment, because to some extent, they're going to want to treat you how you want to be treated. And you probably are not the best person to dictate your own treatment, even if you're a doctor or a psychiatrist. Legal, sure, they're prescribed. You've heard of them: Xanax, lorazepam, clonazepam or Klonopin. Um, there, there's a bunch. Valium, or is Valium? I'm not sure if Valium is one or not. Ativan. But yeah, they're pretty widespread. Restoril, which is temazepam. If it's got a Pam at the end or a Van at the end, it's probably a benzo. And they were. This is always the way that it is, or it seems to be always be the way it is. It's like a class of drugs are introduced as therapeutic. It's found out that they're addictive, and a new class of drugs supersedes them. And then that new class of drugs, it turns out, are as addictive, if not more addictive. It's a similar thing. The rise of heroin was basically, heroin was a substitute for morphine because it was thought to be less addictive than morphine. I think it was morphine. But then obviously that turned out to be a problem. So it's always sort of like, you're chasing the latest and greatest, and whatever is sort of in. I guess part of the problem is like we have this, and it's not entirely unfounded, but we have this idea, or I have this idea, or people have this idea, that where we are now is the height of medical understanding, right? And that things will never go back, right? That progress is a march forward. Medical science is a march forward. And where we are now is always going to be better than where we were. And I don't really think that's true. It's usually true, but it's not, I don't think it's always true. So I think it's dangerous to just kind of say that, well, this is what we take now. We take benzodiazepines instead of barbiturates, because barbiturates were found to be, people were taking, I forget what the big, there was that big barbiturate that was very popular in the 70s with everybody as recreational. But anyway, there we go. Yep. But I don't want to just focus on these either, right? Like, just like I was saying, I'm not necessarily talking about marijuana this entire time. I'm also not talking about it. And this is true, Jonathan. I don't, there's, an illness is an illness. Like, these things are, you can be afflicted with disease. And I've always found sort of solace in that idea that if you deal with daily depression and anxiety, it takes so much courage and effort to just get up every day and to just do stuff that, like, for other people, it's nothing. A lot of philosophers will say things like, if you haven't gone through a period of soul-crushing depression, then you're a child, essentially, right? You have not yet experienced the long, dark, I'm going to say tea time of the soul, but long, dark night of the soul. I don't know if I believe that either, right? But there is like something to be said for, if you are young, there is a bit of a connection between, is this causative? Is this correlative? Is it people who are not very introspective or who don't have a lot of free time? And that's a very different thing, right? If you don't have a lot of free time, you're not if you're constantly thinking about where you're going to get your next meal from, it's difficult for you to it's difficult for you to malinger. Ennui doesn't really enter your lexicon because it's like you just got to do what you got to do to get through the day. What is Michael Sanguine? What is? Oh, that's terrible, Mike. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. It's really difficult because like I have my it depends who you ask. That completely depends who you ask. I just said like I basically don't subscribe to that notion, but if you were to ask existential philosophers or Schopenhauer, existential philosophers, or Dostoevsky would say that. Mostly because I think it's more to do with, and I don't think it's a prerequisite, right? But I do think introspection is a prerequisite for wisdom, whatever triggers that, whether it's depression or not. And maybe the introspection, like it's chicken and egging it a little bit, maybe the introspection is what triggers the depression. I don't know. I don't know. I'm just saying words, and now I'm going to check to see if anybody has. Yeah, I don't believe that either, Jonathan. Like, I guess I don't really adhere to either extreme. I don't adhere to either extreme view on that. There's no karma. Like, yeah, like people want to be able to somehow say my suffering was worth it because I was able to get this thing out of it. But it doesn't mean like that. There's no guarantees, right? There's no promises. So in that respect, I agree with you. But anyway, let's why don't we talk about it? Really? Okay. I'm gonna send some links to some people. Yo, Rebecca. Last night I dreamt I went to Mandalay again. Okay, guess what? I watched the new Rebecca. It sucks. Like, why are you... Even Gus Van Sant. Gus Van Sant did, obviously, remade Psycho. At least he did it shot for shot. Like, I don't know what they were thinking with the remake of Rebecca. It was horrible. Terrible. But it did keep the first line. Last night I dreamt I went to Mandalay again. Why is that so evocative? I don't know. Like, it might have just been the time in my life. Well, no, a lot of people claim like that's one of the best opening lines. There with "Call Me Ishmael," and the opening paragraph of Notes from the Underground. Oh man, so did I. If there are people out there who do not know David Mitchell and Robert Webb, they have a show called that, or they had a show called That Mitchell and Webb Look, which was it was hilarious. So was Peep Show. They did Peep Show. If you didn't see Peep Show, but they were, they had the skit where getting a call from scam. I'm getting a scam likely call. Should I answer a scam likely call? Not going to happen. 100 Years of Solitude. That's Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Yeah, they had a skit where they were reflective Nazis during World War II, and David Mitchell looks at Robert Webb and is like, "Why do we have skulls on our uniforms? Are we the baddies?" That sort of self-realization I found quite funny. This one monitor pops out of my ear a bit. Don't like it. Don't like it. Robert Webb just recently had heart surgery. He had a faulty aortic valve, I believe, which was it? I don't even know. That and the raunchy 70s hospital where Robert Webb played somebody who couldn't quite get the hang between like sort of risque double entendres that were kind of like, whoa, and just being outright vulgar. He kept trying to get it and he couldn't. That was really good. If you haven't seen that Mitchell and Webb look, definitely check it out. All right, I've sent some invites to people. If you've talked, no, he had aortic dissection. This was just one of, I think he had like a leaky valve. Wait a minute, what is this going on here? A warrant out for an arrest in Miami? What? Probably one of my favorite Mitchell and Webb sketches is they had a sort of seer character who could see the future, but the problem is he saw so far into the future that he was seeing things that the problems he was solving, the problems hadn't even come up yet. So his solutions were useless because the problems weren't there yet. So there was like, he invented, he shows to his king a little wooden mouse. And he's like, look, it's a mouse. And the king is like, what's that for? And he's like, well, I'm not sure, but I have the feeling like if you move it, that it would be attached to a thing and that it would also correspond to the movements of that thing. And the king's like, well, I don't, or the emperor's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And the guy's like, well, but you don't know the best part yet. Look, the best part, no wires, right? Of course, back then, the concept of wires didn't exist. So the concept of something being wired versus wireless was not an issue yet. Funny stuff. Funnier when they do it. Definitely funnier when they do it. Yeah, it's a bad one. I have an uncle who had his aorta replaced, including the crook, from, I think it was like 2 feet of Dacron, an aorta that they made for him. They had to lower his body temperature by 15 degrees. And it was supposed to last 10 years max. And this was 15 years ago, and the guy's still going strong. I never did listen to the radio show. I am waiting for somebody to call in. Somebody called. The lines are open. If nobody calls in very soon, I will open it up to people who have called in before. So again, email this address right here, a dead symbol @gmail.com, and just say I want to talk. And as usual, I'd love to talk to people I haven't spoken to before. I'd love to talk to people who have drug-related experiences or stories they want to share. I'd prefer you be on video Well, Rebecca called. I guess it's possible that the link doesn't change. Because did I send the link to you, Rebecca? I don't think I did. But there you are. And there is nobody who has responded to my link yet. So I'm going to bring you in, Rebecca. You ready? It's Nasha Writer / Rebecca /
Hi.
Hi. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm still buzzed up from work,
I was going to say,
but
you seem a little up.
yeah,
Is this for the drug talk? Is there anything you want to admit to?
I wish.
What are your thoughts? What are your feelings on the regulation of drugs and or deregulation?
Mm, legalize everything, put all that money into rehab.
So people who can handle it, essentially, like people who can, well, no,
No, someone was noticing my lipstick.
oh.
No, it's not making kissy faces at you.
So people who basically legalize drugs, and the people who are able to say regulate their own drug use and be high functioning human beings are able to do that, and
Mm-hmm.
then put that money into rehab institutions for those who cannot do it. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the
So,
war on drugs has been lost, so we got to do something else.
but would you just say that across the board for all drugs, or would there be anything that like methamphetamine would that be okay?
I I mean, it is. Like, because I know shrooms have medicinal uses these days, and even Molly does, and hell, they're putting cocaine in medicine again.
Are
Yeah,
they?
I would just legalize it. There's like a nose spray coming out that may have some form of it, and it's supposed to help you after you have like nose surgery.
I remember when I was a younger, and I think this was the case for some time, and this was in a Philip K. Dick book, but solar cane used to be this anesthetic for when you get a sunburn. And I don't know if you know this, Rebecca, but I used to live in Miami. So I used to get sunburns a lot. So we'd get solar cane a lot. And apparently you can actually derive something like cocaine from solar cane, which, I mean, solar cane uses lidocaine, I'm pretty sure. So I don't really know how you derive cocaine from lidocaine, but I don't know. That sounds, maybe that's
Well,
apocryphal. Maybe Philip K. Dick was, because Philip K. Dick was quite the Benzedrine popper. Um, he wrote all his best stuff when he didn't know what he was doing.
oh,
What is Nicholas saying? Aerosolized cocaine is used for a lot of surgeries these days. Well, I mean, it is I get a vasodilator and a like a contact anesthetic, a local anesthetic. Um, but yeah, I don't know. So you would just say deregulation across the board and let people. I mean, 'cause a lot of people are going to overdose, right, before they can get to
I mean,
rehab.
a lot of people overdosing now.
Yeah. Uh,
But I would also regulate what drugs are put out there. So not just like street meth. I mean, okay, it's weird for the government to be making meth, but it could be made by real ass scientists at least.
so real Walter Whites out there, you'd get. I think.
Exactly.
Yeah. Um, I still think you can like regardless on the quality, right? You can still OD on it. Um,
Oh yeah.
I think I don't know, like I don't know where I stand on that. I mean, I feel like, I mean, if alcohol is legal, I mean, alcohol is one of the most destructive things you can put in your body, right? But um, methamphetamine to me, methamphetamine and cocaine seem like the line between like cocaine and crack and that whole kind of uh, let's let's come down much harder on crack because it tends
Yeah.
to be used by black urban people because it's cheaper and easier to carry around with you, and it gives you like it's more addictive, it gives you more of a stronger hit. And you know the Patrick Batemans were doing the civilized version of cocaine that Sigmund Freud was injecting. Um, I don't know if you're familiar with the Sherlock Holmes story, the 10% solution. Um, or was it the
Mm.
10% solution or the 7% solution? Um, look this up now.
If you're unfamiliar about the whole thing, chat with crack and cocaine, just listen to the song "White Lines" by Grandmaster Flash,
Are you sure you don't
and
mean
you'll get.
Duran Duran?
No, not God. No, no, God damn it, not Duran Duran.
No, it was the 7% solution. It actually was not. Um, it was, oh, so this shows what I know. This actually wasn't written by Conan Doyle. This was a fan service. But Sherlock Holmes injected cocaine, right? As
Mm,
did Sigmund Freud. Um, so it was sort of this weird arbitrary distinction between cocaine and crack that most people think was created in order to be able to target people of color.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, it's crappy. Um, how are you doing though? How is you say you just got home from work?
yeah. Well, work, and I had to help my nephew with some schooling because he's like me when I was his age. Like, if he didn't pick it up right away, he deemed it stupid and not worth learning. So now I'm trying to help him with that because he's not paying attention, and his he can take ASL in school, and I'm pissed because I couldn't do that.
I didn't know. Yeah, I didn't realize that was a thing now.
It totally is. I just got stuck with Spanish.
Well, you know, forget it. I'm not even gonna.
No, say it.
I was just gonna make another reference to where I'm from. Uh, it is interesting that I can remember like sort of a similar outlook on. I just didn't want to try stuff that I thought I might fail at. So if I wasn't like instantly pretty good at something, I would tend to be like I would have the same attitude and just be like, "That's for idiots," and then move on to something else. And I
Mhm.
found something that I was good at, then I would pursue that instead. So
Yeah,
yeah. How old is your nephew?
hang
Around.
on. There's a lot of them.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be exact. I'm just
14.
kind of. Oh,
Yeah,
that's an age.
yeah. But actually, he's my favorite. So
Yeah. Oh, well, that's good. What does your
he's just
kid
like
say?
me.
You're vegan. I didn't know that.
No,
Oh, Negan. Yeah, you're not Negan though. I'm almost positive that you're not.
I'm a Negan.
You're a Negan. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about or add to the discussion about uh, either the medicinal uses of deregulating drugs or deregulating drugs or anything about any personal experiences that you'd like to share?
I mean, I know like deregulation is going to come very slowly, but 'cause I know DC just made like mushrooms legal.
Yeah, but see, DC does
Kind
some
of,
weird stuff, right? Like DC made
yeah,
like pot is legal, but it's illegal to sell, right?
yeah.
So that they have to grant you a license to sell, and they won't grant anyone licenses. So it's sort of like a loophole.
Hmm.
But the possession of small amounts of marijuana now in DC is not illegal anymore. And technically, it's not illegal to sell, but you have to be licensed, and they just don't license anyone, which is weird.
Yeah. My dad told me he used to go down to DC to get codeine all the time.
When
DC's
was
a
that?
weird place.
How long
Oh,
ago was this?
like 75, 76.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and
Yeah.
codeine was legal. You could get codeine over the counter in Canada up until like 20 or 30
Yeah, in
years
the
ago.
UK.
I
Lucky
think
them.
now they've cracked down on it a bit because it's fairly easy to cold filter and um,
Oh, yeah. It's like, yeah. It's derivative off of morphine, I think.
yep,
Huh. I don't know why I
it
know
is
that.
an opiate. But opiates are another class of drugs that I feel like have sort of gotten short shrift and have therapeutic qualities as well.
Mm,
And for some reason, we vilify them, and I don't know exactly why, but they are difficult. I think, like you said, like some people who can sort of regulate what they're doing they'd be okay. But it is easy
mm.
if you had like an infinite, if you had access to say as much OxyContin as you wanted, it'd be hard for you, not you, but the broader
No,
you.
no. It'd be hard for me. I'd be dead in like 3 months. I'm not even going to lie.
But what a 3 months? That's
I know, right? I'm here for a good time, not a long time.
that's it. That's a good way of
But
putting it.
actually, my dad's in pain management regularly, and his amount got cut back because of other people, which
Yeah,
sucks for him.
because it's a problem because a lot of a lot of pharmacies only get a certain amount, and they end up
Yeah,
having to make decisions on who they're going to give the medication to and make those sort of priority calls.
yeah. Like my dad got cut back from 6 to 4 pills a day, and while 6 might sound excessive, you're not there when he wakes up in pain in the middle of the night.
Yeah, but
So
I mean, a pill. It depends what's in the pill, right? Like you could have. I
yeah,
mean, if it's OxyContin, you could have 120 milligrams of oxycodone in a single pill, right? Or
yeah,
or you could just be taking roxicodone, which would be like 5 milligrams in a pill. Um, yeah, but so you're saying like six, right? So yeah, if you wake up in pain, you wake up in pain, and sometimes maybe not only wake up in pain, but wake up with a little bit of withdrawal because maybe you've been asleep for 6 or 7 hours, and that medication has a
yeah,
pretty short half life
yeah.
in your
I mean,
bloodstream.
but I totally get why they scaled it back. Like I've had it a few times for various reasons, and woo, will it fill all the holes in you? It really does. That shit. Just like any emotional problems you have, that just fills it up.
When I
It's just
was a
fun though.
when I was young, very
Mm,
young, uh,
mm,
or much younger than I am now, I can remember the first time I tried a Strutic that I will not name, um, and my reaction was that I remember the first thing I felt was like, "Wow, I didn't realize I was in pain. Like, I didn't even
mm.
know. Like it took pain away that I didn't even realize I had." Um, and the fact and that ignorance was a blessing because then, of course, once the effects wore off, I was acutely aware of this pain coming back that I didn't even really feel before, right? Um, and I wouldn't call it physical pain, but I wouldn't really call it psychological pain either. It was more like um, almost like a dread based, bone deep, brainstem type pain um, that it addresses. So yeah, that's a tough one because it's hard to know what that can do and then willingly choose to not feel it um, or willingly say it's like somebody it's like you've been carrying an anchor your whole life and then someone takes it away from you and you're like, oh my god, not having this anchor feels great, and then they're like, no, now you got to take it back, right? um,
Yeah,
something
that was
like
like
that.
That was House's whole thing, wasn't he? Like he was just afraid of the pain.
Well, in
That's
theory,
what he
he
said.
actually had that physical pain of muscle death, but I think it
Yeah.
turned into sort of it was more than that. And, how much of that was real and how much of that was psychological, I guess nobody really knew, right? Um, but he, I don't know what he did for, um, I don't know. It's sort of strange that he almost kind of romanticized it in a way, right? Like he was like,
Yeah.
well, how's it's just going around popping Vicodin like it's nothing. And Vicodin, the problem with Vicodin is it's between 325 milligrams and 500 milligrams of acetaminophen.
Yeah, I'm
And a
surprised
toxic,
his liver didn't fall out of his butt.
yeah, exactly. A toxic dose of acetaminophen is 4 grams. 4 mil,
Yeah.
yeah, 4 grams. So, but that's why they put it in there, right? To stop you from abusing the part of it that actually has an effect. So, but yeah, it's good to see you, Rebecca.
You too.
I keep forgetting. Like, is it Becca or Rebecca, or should I call you? What should I call you?
I like Becca, actually.
Becca. Okay.
Hmm.
I will call you not Negan. I can't
It just
wait to.
came today. He got so excited. Yay, bug buddies.
You might hate it.
Well, I read like the back to my dad, and he was like, "Oh, that sounds pleasant." I'm like, "Yeah, it's a real, get in a warm tub, slit your wrist kind of thing, but it's my
Yeah,
kind of
I'm
thing."
convinced that he wrote it to try and make people suicide. It's a stress test to see if you can psychologically stand. But I've recommended it to people who I
Nah, bring it.
really, really respect and who are really, really intelligent. They read it and they just say, "Well, this is just a bunch of flowery bullshit." What was that? I don't know what you were pointing. You, oh, you're yes, like you, but you haven't read it yet. Wait, I don't know what you were. You got to be. Sometimes I'm a little. I don't know what
Slow.
you're hitting at. Yeah, I don't know what's going on here. I feel like I missed a joke.
It's all right.
Okay. All right. Well, Becca, we will talk soon, and it was good to talk to you again.
You
And
too.
yeah, have a good night.
You too. Adios.
All right. Bye bye. And it appears that helicopter is me. Of course it is. Of course, if you ever hear a helicopter, it's gonna be Michael. You're reading two of oops, two of my favorite comics. Those and Hate and anything by Junji Ito. Wow, I'm sure you can hear that. Another helicopter going around here. Okay, so joining us now is I believe someone who I believe is training to be an EMT. Is that correct? In school to be an EMT? Am I misremembering? I could be. Let's just bring him on and ask. He might have something to say about Narcan. Nicholas,
Narcan is one of our favorite drugs.
I would imagine
Um,
it's very, very frequently used.
well, it's easy to oversell, I guess, the amount of use we get out of Narcan because you get this special triangle for when you use Narcan, which is someone went down for an obvious opioid overdose or something that you can kind of assume is an opioid overdose, and then someone called 911, and then we showed up before they were gone, which is less common than you might think. Or at
Less
least
common
it's less common than. Go ahead.
less common to show up before they're gone, or less common. What about that is less
Look,
common?
like So I should probably take a step back. There's three
Wait,
levels of people.
actually, wait,
Go
hold on.
ahead.
What's your name? Because I know your name.
Hi. I'm Nick. I'm Nick. Nicholas Wyman. I prefer Nick, I guess.
This
I
is
always
Nick.
kind of associated Nicholas with like my parents, Nicholas Wyman. But
I could understand where that would be like, yeah, when you hear your full name said in a sort of stentorian way, that means trouble. Um, and you emailed me, so you're training to be an EMT right now, right? Or
so that's actually what I was about to clarify.
okay, yeah, please go ahead.
Um, there are three levels of people you might encounter on an ambulance, capital A. And then there's a couple of other things that like, okay, well, this isn't technically an ambulance, it's a medical transport. Um, but there's responders, technicians, and paramedics. Technically speaking, paramedics are EMTPs. So training to be a paramedic, if you, some people, if you said, oh, you're training to be an EMT, they would get really offended because, no, I'm not training to be a nurse, I'm training to be a doctor. How dare you? But I'm training to be an EMTP.
Okay,
Um,
so people are saying that you're. Wait, so hold on. Whose sound
oh,
is too low? Are we saying that my sound is too low? Because I'm seeing. Okay, I'm gonna turn me up a little bit here. Um, okay, so you're training to be an EMTP.
which is called a paramedic.
Okay, so that's a paramedic. And
Yeah.
so on an ambulance, you'll have EMTPs, and then you'll have what else?
So an ambulance that shows up because you fell over and cut your head off, that's a ALS
That would be a
ambulance.
hearse, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that would be a hearse. But like if you're calling 911 and we think it's serious bad news, what you're probably seeing there is a paramedic and then either another paramedic and a basic, at least in America.
Will when you're doing that, so like when you call in, they'll actually kind of like choose who populates, say, the ambulance that they're sending out based on the severity of what they judge the call to be?
It depends on the system. So there's two levels of ambulance. There's basic life support and advanced life support, and then sometimes there's what's called ILS, intermediate life support. Um, ALS is the most common ambulance to show up because they're also the most common ambulance to have. But there's also basic life support, which sometimes that gets deployed to, oh, I stubbed my toe. Or I shouldn't do that voice. But there's basic life support, which is,
It's okay
oh,
to
I
make
stubbed
fun
my
of people
toe.
who have stubbed their toe. I think that's
Yeah, yeah. Um, and like, yes, there is a little bit of triaging that happens at the dispatch level.
that's what I was wondering
But there's
about. And is it
also,
also is it not just the personnel but also the type of vehicle, like how the vehicle is decked out? Are all ambulances the same, or are there like trauma ambulances and then like you're kind of like I stubbed my toe ambulances, like that kind of thing?
that's going to depend on your system as well. But broadly speaking, what's going to change is not what the ambulance is built out of or like any actual structural component, but what medications there are in the ambulance and who's in it. Depending on your system, again, most often you have a whole bunch of ambulances sort of stationed throughout the city. And then you're going to have an ALS ambulance that's responding to, I fell off a ladder onto my head and I woke up 2 hours later. And then sometimes you'll have a BLS ambulance that's responding to
Can you know what those
um,
stand for? Are those?
advanced life support and basic life support.
Oh, gotcha. Yes, I should have been able to
Sorry,
guess that. Yeah.
I'm in training right now, so I'm all boned up on all the acronyms. Um, but so sometimes there is that triaging that occurs where it's like, oh, I stubbed my toe. Can you come over and pick me up? Or, oh, I'm out of medication. Can you come over and pick me up? And if someone does get sent out, those will sometimes be basic life support ambulances. But basic life support also handles, I'm in hospital A, but they don't have the surgery type that I want. So
So
we're going to
transport.
hospital B. Yeah.
Gotcha. If they can stabilize somebody. Yeah, I see right now somebody's saying that, Pavi's saying that when her father had a heart attack, they sent a general ambulance and then a specialist ambulance, which makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So
And there's complexity here with like sometimes there's critical care ambulances and sometimes you'll get a emergency physician, but ALS, BLS, those are the two most common.
So if somebody had an opiate overdose, I would imagine that would get BLS, right? Or no,
Probably not actually,
really?
because so the scary thing about an opioid overdose is that they're not breathing.
Right.
And in most systems, a basic life support ambulance can give Narcan. But there's all sorts of weird stuff that starts happening when the body stops breathing.
I would
And
think so.
if you think in your head about the type of person who's passed out on the side of the road, not breathing because they took too many opioids, most of the time that person's also going to have possibly injuries. They're going to be disoriented, and they might have other psychological issues going on that you're going to want a more advanced provider to respond to. Um,
That makes sense.
yeah,
So, how far in are you? Like, how far along are you? Where are you in your
there's
journey?
so I'm in sort of a special boy, ultra fashionable paramedic training program, where I'm going to a 4-year university to get a bachelor's of science in emergency medicine. That's going to lead up to hopefully like doctor, surgeon sort of stuff. That's unusual. So what I'm talking about is not the most common thing. Um, but I am roughly a third of the way through. Right now, I've completed about half of my like textbook in classroom learning. And then once I'm done with the other half of that, I'm going to do something called an internship, where I work on an ambulance for my summer semester, basically. Um, but I am not paid, and I'm constantly tested for, okay, but really, do you know this?
Yeah,
Okay, but really, can you do this?
yeah. Is it one of those
And
watch one, watch one, do one, teach one kind of?
yeah, exactly. Um,
Yeah, I have well, I have a lot of medical personnel in my family, right? So I'm fairly familiar with the way a lot of that stuff works. Not necessarily what you're talking about as far as like transitioning from an EMTP to an MD or some kind of dual enrollment system where you might be taking medical school classes. Well, I would imagine EMTPs are taking some sort of medical school classes, some of the same classes that doctors and or nurse practitioners and or physician assistants take. I know a lot of those are the same classes for the first couple of years anyway, postgraduate, right? So is that kind of the same kind of thing that we're talking about here? When you take, you're gonna get a Bachelor of Science in EMT medicine, essentially, right?
um, Emergency medical services is
I'm
the
sorry,
official
emergency
like
medical
designation.
services.
No. And I'm highlighting that difference because there are plenty of people who do get the paramedic license or the paramedic certificate, and then they just stay there in the hopes
Right.
of becoming like a station chief or something like that. But
But you're planning to go
I
on.
have taken all of my pre-med classes, and
So you're going
most
to
of
take the
those were
MCAT.
also requirements for paramedic school.
Right. So you will complete what you need to, then take the MCAT, and you will be a paramedic maybe while you're in medical school. Is that?
Hopefully, that way I can get money. But
Wow.
the the MCAT is not required to have a paramedic license, and some of the like more biochem form like cell form and function sort of classes that I took are not required to be a paramedic. But paramedics usually do have all of the like anatomy and physiology and chemistry knowledge. And I know that the I'm doing what's kind of called zero to hero, where I go from being a nobody on the street to being a paramedic rather quickly and with that very little field experience. But the people who do have a lot more experience, they tend to have a class that covers more of the anatomy and physiology, and a little bit more of the down and dirty of how certain drugs work. Whereas I'm sitting here like, okay, so this molecule attaches to this receptor, which causes this response, which is why we call it the opioid response. And that's why we use morphine. Um, as opposed to you give them 10 milligrams, and if they're still awake, give them more.
Just administer 10 milligrams, push 10 milligrams every minute until they're no longer awake.
Yeah.
So is there
Which
like
is
a hierarchical system once you're an EMT, where you have, if I'm an EMT and I've only been around for a year, and then you have EMTs who've been around for 5 or 6 years, is it just like, well, just senior EMT? Is that kind of how it goes, or is there actually like more of a hierarchy than that?
so at least in America, the most common setup that you'll end up having is
Oh, by the way, where are you? Whereabouts?
I'm in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I go
Okay.
to University of New Mexico. Um, I'm usually wearing my uniform nowadays. I grew up in California though. Um,
Okay. Cool. Sorry, I didn't mean to
no,
interrupt.
no,
Just
go ahead. Um, So most commonly on an ambulance, you have two different people. You have usually one person who's been around longer or is a higher licensure, and another person who has usually been around for less time and may not have the same license. And generally, the person with a higher licensure will be in charge, but depending on the call and the pair, it's a very one of the reasons I like ambulance work so much is that it's a very non-hierarchical system. It's you and the guy next to you and whatever the hell's going on. It's not, I have to sign your paper, um, or anything like that.
by the way, people are saying they love your voice. It's silky smooth.
Thank you so much.
Should
I've been
do some
told.
ASMR. Actually, looks like you have some sound. Uh, is that sound treatment behind you, or is that like a privacy
Um,
screen?
that is a privacy screen for my online classes.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. I wasn't sure if maybe you
No
did any
worries.
voice work.
My cousin's thinking of getting into voice work, and I'm rooting for him to do that. But so far, I've just accepted the compliments about, oh, you should do audiobooks. And I go, yes, I should, and then never think about it again.
Well, you'll
I
get that the
really
rest
should,
of your
though.
life. That's one of the great things about
Hopefully.
a voice is it tends to
Yeah.
stick with you. So, um, what about the person who drives? This is gonna sound really stupid. The person who
Go
drives the
ahead.
ambulance, are they like a totally separate is that just like the driver who's trained in
Very, very
driving?
rarely is it that there is a separate driver role. And if
Oh,
they are, it's usually that something weird happened and now there's three people on this ambulance, and the lowest ranking person or the person who is least needed is the driver.
really? I always
So
assumed there was
when
a driver role, like somebody who was more trained in driving emergency vehicles, because I mean, you are going through, in some cases, right, going through red lights or um,
yeah,
doing things that might require some more skill than, say, your typical DMV visit, right?
yeah,
I
there's
guess you would have
this
to get licensed for. I mean, it's like a truck, right? So you do have to get like a special license to some extent,
there's a
right?
line I'm trying to very carefully walk whenever I talk about my training, which is making sure people feel entirely comfortable with the medical system as it exists right now and being incredibly critical of
Be, oh
people who
man.
screw up.
Well, I don't want you to get in trouble, right? But um,
So we don't, to my knowledge, there is no special licensure requirement for driving an ambulance like there is for a fire truck. And part of that is because, broadly speaking, emergency services are very, very understaffed and underfunded. And so if you're going to put us through 100 more hours of training, you have to find somewhere where a patient isn't going to get care because of that.
right.
Um, and people run red lights all the time. People go 10 miles over the speed limit all the time.
That's true.
Um, And the type of weight and body that we use for ambulances is actually usually just like a FISO or something, or like a Ford F-150 that we staple the box on top of, sometimes
Wow.
literally.
Wow.
Um, it's sort of the Wild West of medicine, is something that a lot of people like to say. Again, trying to walk that line between like you have no reason to fear while you're in the back of an ambulance, but also some funny stuff does happen.
That
Um,
is, so yeah, that's all news to me. I had no idea at all. Um,
yeah.
yeah, I assumed you had like a getaway driver, essentially, right? Like somebody who could be.
Sometimes the EMT can feel like that. I know that personally, but so sometimes, and so earlier I mentioned the person who is least needed. So if you get a call that's like, "Hey, I'm not breathing," or "Hey, my friend's not breathing," you show up, you give them Narcan, they pop up, they punch you, and then you put them in the back of the rig and start moving. You've already done everything you can for that patient as a paramedic, and maybe this is hour 11, hour 23, and really you're going to be better served going as fast as you can to the hospital, while your basic, who's maybe training to be a paramedic, can sit there and like take their blood pressure every 5 minutes, um, make sure that they're doing well. And a lot of the people who stay at basic or who are there right now, a lot of them are better at patient care, or patient like talking to stuff. Um, and so the side effect of that is that sometimes, like, I know one of my friends at the academy, she was a basic for a really long time, and her job was, okay, we don't know if this person's going to make it to the hospital. Make sure that their last 15 minutes are the nicest 15 minutes they've had.
Wow. Hmm. Yeah, that's. Um, You seem like a really, really considerate, caring, and intelligent person. I'm glad that there are
That's
people
the
like
goal.
you who are doing this, right? And it is, I do think, like, obviously, I can't imagine the strain that people who are currently EMTs, or what are sort of broadly considered EMTs, whether or not they're a particular kind of EMT or not, what they're going through right now, right? If they're trying to get to someone who's not breathing and you don't know if it's COVID or not, and it seems to me like it would be like this would be one of the most stressful. If I were an EMT, I can't imagine how stressed out I'd be right now. It also seems like the need would be much greater, right? And that maybe they might be trying to like rush some people to like get some more bodies in some more. Um,
It's been really interesting to see that. I can personally say that my training feels no worse for wear than, in fact, part of the problem is that we can't train people quickly enough, because in order to become a paramedic, there's a certain amount of time you need to spend in a hospital. And
okay,
if you have a really bad pandemic, then you might say, hey, no more students. Um,
I didn't. Yeah,
which,
that's something else I never even thought about. You're right. Yeah, you don't want to.
um,
You're right. Yeah, this is not the time to be. This is not the time to be a teaching hospital either, and yet you can't
yeah,
abandon the future, right? Like it seems like a rock and a hard place, right?
I know
Uh,
that last year the academy had a few behavioral issues with the students that might have been related to the COVID pandemic, in terms of like everything's catching fire and I am in one of the most stressful training periods of my life. Um, but from what I understand, they sorted that out, and the people who got the license, did very clearly deserved it, and the people who didn't get their license aren't a threat to patients. So,
by the way, if I were stuck between a rock and a hard place, would that be ALS or would that be BL?
um, it depends on the hard place. If you're lucky enough to be in a hard place that's not threatening to us, you might get the good ambulance. But if it's the bad ambulance, we'll send PD and pick up the pieces after.
And
So
sorry, that was just a terrible joke. But so what?
I made it
So
funny, don't worry.
I hope I have. I'm just interested in this, and I hope I'm not like if there's something you want to talk about, I'm happy to talk about what you want to talk about. I don't want to
I want
be.
to talk to you. I like you.
Oh,
Don't, yeah.
that's sweet. um, But I'm curious about like the relationship that uh, EMTs and or ambulances. These are private corporations.
Um,
Are they hospital
Usually at this
associated?
point, it's kind of complicated, but I'll put it this way. Every paramedic and every EMT and every responder or PSP has to think about two things. What is the guy who works for the hospital going to think about what I just did? Um, and what is my CEO going to think about what I just did? And that's because a lot of ambulance services are private companies, but they are contracted to the company or to the city, and contracted to the hospital. And so, like in my local area, almost every service that I know of is either private or non-profit private, if that makes any sense. Or they're with the fire service, which means that they're public. Um, and so the net result of that is like talking to some of my friends at the academy and my personal experience working in California. There are times where you're going, okay, so legally this is what I'm supposed to do. And my company can't tell me to do anything illegal, but they can definitely tell me to do some things that are saving their ass more than saving the patient. And then I've got this guy who's my medical director who's telling me, yeah, it would be best if you did this, but that may not reflect what I have, like what I've actually seen in the field. In California, in certain jurisdictions, for example, you have to call a doctor in order to give someone an EpiPen, which is like the little
An
stick for
EpiPen.
allergic reactions.
Wow.
And so that means that if I show up and someone's, they're covered in hives, they're covered in bees, they're covered in peanut butter, and I go and they've got an EpiPen in their hand, and they're frozen in this state of, oh my God, I've just had a
You
really bad
can't
allergic
even.
reaction. I have to go, okay, hang on. Dr. Doofenshmirtz is probably going to say yes, but I need to legally make sure he's going
Man,
to.
Dr.
Um,
Doofenshmirtz.
and so I'm gonna call him. And the most common way for that call to go is, um, yeah, there's a patient here having an allergic reaction. Can I give him his EpiPen? Yeah, all right. Um, and the second most common way for that call to go is, yeah, I showed up and the patient just gave himself the EpiPen and then went unconscious. What do I do? Because, I mean, if it's only you.
Right. Yeah. Point taken. Right.
Yeah.
So
I've
you're
never
having to
seen that
choose
happen legally.
between say towing the party line and doing what you know is right. Right. Um,
Yeah. And sometimes that gets really complicated with, like, sometimes you also have to think about, if I lie to the company, then maybe they don't have the money for the gear tomorrow.
that's
Or
true
maybe
too.
they don't have the money for me or the truck tomorrow.
Because they're now tied up in litigation um, or who knows. But what about when it comes to where you bring your patients?
That one I have never seen money get too involved in,
Oh, okay.
thankfully.
Because I
We're, at
keep
least
thinking,
for my academy, we're very, very lucky in that we're trained to basically know what every hospital can do, when we should decide for the patient which hospital they're going to, and when we should let the patient decide, and when the patient legally can decide.
oh, so okay, I would imagine there's some kind of hierarchy of, okay, well, this person needs to go to a trauma hospital. So sorry, you're saying you want to go to St. Jude's, patient. I understand that, but you need a trauma hospital. St. Jude's is not a trauma hospital. You're going to a trauma hospital. Um, I would imagine there's something in the equation about distance, right? About trying to get them to a
Yeah.
hospital as quickly as possible. Um, so I would guess there's like, I don't know what the algorithm is, but some sort of algorithm that goes through y'all's heads when you're making the assessment of where are we going to take these people, or is that dictated to you? Like, do you just say, here's what we're experiencing, and then someone says, take them here? Because I guess there's also like
That
the load of the
one,
hospital, right?
we very rarely we consider the load of the hospital only when it has been considered for us. Is how I would put that. I've never heard of anyone making a decision of, oh, well, this patient has 150 patients, this other or this hospital has 150 patients, this other hospital has 100. I'll take it to this one, because very rarely is that the piece of information that's going to make the decision for you. And there's all sorts of ways that a patient can end up at one hospital having been taken to another. Um, but if you're at a place where you need to make the hospital decision for the patient, there's probably only one right decision, right? So like if they're having earlier some earlier we brought up dissections. If you're having some sort of split in your spinal blood flow that's causing that much bleeding, you need a thoracic surgeon. I don't care what you think. Um, if you want to go to, there's one bed and one nurse and one doctor who's probably asleep, you're probably not awake to make that decision. Um, but if you get so far down the sort of mental algorithm of all of the stuff that you have to consider that it's like, oh, well, which one has more? You probably don't even know that information.
Huh.
Um, you may have a favorite. You may have a, oh, well, I know that this one my patients usually survive, or this one my patients don't. Like sometimes that'll come into it, but I've never heard of anyone thinking about load. And very rarely there's protocol on the level of, hey, if this patient has this list of things going on, they should go to this hospital. But I very rarely heard that actually coming into anyone's decision-making process, because usually if you're being guided by patient outcomes, you're going to agree with the protocol, or you're going to have a good enough reason not to agree with the protocol that the protocol is going to get changed after you do it,
Gotcha. Yeah.
or you're going to get fired. But that's the
Well,
that's the life we live.
that's one of the things that seems like, well, I mean, that's when you're dealing with people's lives, right? It seems like if you're, uh, no, no. So here's another, like, I guess I vacillate between this because, um, I don't even know, like, right, if as an EMT, if you get fired for not following protocol, doing what you thought was right, um, maybe it still was right, right? But the outcome was poor, right? Doesn't mean that your decision was wrong necessarily. It just means the outcome was poor in the wake of that decision. And you were to get fired, is there like sort of like once you're fired, are you persona non grata? Do you have to like go to a county where they're in desperate need of EMTs or something? Like I don't even know how
It
that works.
depends on the offense, and it depends on how you got fired,
Is it like the Catholic
and it depends
Church?
on the companies in your area, I suppose.
Huh.
Um, Much like doctors, we have a license that can get, cut in half, thrown in an incinerator, and then we can't work again in that area.
Yeah.
And you have to ship out to some other state, and then you're EMT working in some backwater in Alabama, um, you know, doing sutures on people's toes because that's all you're allowed to do now. Um, but that's really rare in my experience. Um, Partially because as a paramedic and as a basic, especially training as a basic in California, legal stuff is really, really drilled into us. And how can I put this? Everyone I know is in the awkward position of encouraging people to sue medical professionals as often and as viciously as possible, because you don't want to be the person who says, oh, they signed your liver during a surgery. That's not a bad thing. Um, Especially because it could reflect poorly on your license. Um, but sometimes you get caught on the wrong side of that.
Right.
And one thing that I'm really glad my instructors talked about is what's called the counterfactual position, which is, oh, you did this thing and the patient died, therefore you should have done this other thing. And it's a lot more nebulous than that. Um, there's one particular case we were talking about in my academy, actually, where it's a condition where fluid starts to build up around the heart, and then the heart can't beat as well. Um, and you can give them this medication that's going to make it so the heart beats harder. But that also means that the fluid builds up faster. And if the heart is having nutrition and oxygenation problems, it's going to start requiring more.
Right.
So, do you take years off of this person's life giving them the medication, or do you risk them dying because you didn't?
Before the
Or do you
fluid can
risk,
be drained or
yeah, or even do you risk damaging the heart because you gave the medication or the brain because you didn't?
it.
And my instructor, and he's a doctor, my instructor is a doctor, he gave the medication and the patient had a heart attack 20 years down the line and said, oh well, it was because you gave me that medication, and he got sued over it and he won the lawsuit. No
20
big
years
problem.
later.
Yeah.
Wow.
um I might be making parts of that up. I might
To
be
protect.
misremembering.
Right.
Protect, but also just misremembering.
Right.
But then one of his colleagues was in pretty much the exact same situation, didn't give the medication. Patient had, brain problems, you know, once they got it, once everything got fixed, and said, "Hey, you did this to me," and they both got sued. So, which
So,
was the right decision?
right.
And the answer is
Exactly.
whichever one you didn't make.
Yeah, and that's obviously that's crazy, right? I mean, if you're only measuring if you're only measuring whether something was the right decision or not based on outcomes, then um, it just seems like you're not always going to be making your decision in the best interest of the patient, right? You're going to be making, and that's got to be so difficult because then it seems like every day you're being forced to make calls between your own well-being and the well-being of the person that's lying in front of you, right? And I
Yeah.
understand doctors do that all the time, and the Hippocratic Oath, and nurses do that all the time. But in a situation like what you're talking about, where by its very nature, everything is an emergency, right? You're not doing something that where you can think about it for a day. You can, you're not a GP where somebody comes in with, something that might be um, melanoma or not, and you're going to do a biopsy and it's going to take weeks. Like you gotta do something right now, almost all the
Yeah.
time. Um, Seems stressful, man. My hat's off to
It's
you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's funny because the field is becoming, we view what we do every day as less and less of an emergency, partially because we're realizing that the key factor is not how fast you get to a hospital, but rather how fast you get to a medical professional. And we just so happen to be a medical professional. So, for stuff like strokes and heart attacks, we talk about the true emergency, something where it really does matter whether you get to a hospital in the next hour or so. But you notice I use an hour and so there. We've been reading a lot of studies that say if you see an EMT, if you always are going to see an EMT, 10 to 15 minutes after that heart attack, as long as you get to the hospital in the hour, it doesn't actually matter whether or not you get to the, like, whether or not you get it 50 minutes or 60 minutes.
Because you were able to stabilize enough via the
Yeah.
EMT where that time is not significant or not statistically significant, at least.
Yeah. Now, I don't like those studies because they only focus on mortality, which is kind of scary to me as someone who wants to live a long and happy life.
Yeah,
Um,
quality of life isn't necessarily brought into that, is it?
yeah. But it does mean that more and more we're seeing a move away from lights and sirens driving and stuff like that, especially because having something, getting to the hospital 30 seconds quicker versus getting into a super big car crash where the
Right.
ambulance, flips
Especially because you don't
over,
have getaway car
explodes, and then goes
drivers.
into the warp dimension or whatever.
Right.
That's
I, you know, uh, I don't know what made you choose this
trauma
field.
mostly.
Oh, okay. Well, like I said, hats off to you. I wish you the best of luck. I hope that, in your study, like it seems like the way you're going about it, uh, once you get to like if you continue and you get your MD and you're going through your rotations and you're on your ER rotation, right? You're going to have the perspective. You're going to have a perspective that other doctors don't have, right? You're going to have hopefully sympathy. I mean, I only know this basically from fiction, right? But it seems like a lot of times you see doctors yelling at EMTs or treating them kind of, in a way, less than a respectful way, right? And I
Yeah.
realize that's probably, a lot of that's probably just for drama, but also sometimes doctors are jerks. Bit of a God complex with some of
Yeah.
them.
Um, one of my friends is from one of my friend. I will instead say that I have heard that one of the interesting things going from police work to emergency medicine is that police work is very, very interwoven. Your station is your wolf pack, and that level is brought down to your partner in emergency medicine, in that it feels much more confrontational whenever you meet, if you're in an ambulance and you meet a fire crew, or you're in an ambulance and you meet a doctor. But one thing that I've noticed is that a lot of that's because we're all very different in how we view things. If you're a doctor, you've got to think about what this patient is going to look like 10 years down the line. As an EMT, and frankly, early on as a paramedic, I was trained pretty much like, well, once they get to the ambulance or once they get to the hospital, it's not my problem. Um, the most powerful treatment you can give any patient is sign here. Okay. To a doctor or to the patient. Because once you do that, it's not your problem. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
but obviously that's not the best thing you can actually do. Um, the actual reason I was calling in and mentioned that, like, I think I have a good thing about substances, though, is that from my perspective, one of the big conversations in the field is how much opiates do we give, especially since we have access to like stuff like fentanyl. And as I mentioned in the chat earlier, we're looking at sedatives now and going, maybe giving benzos to people isn't such a good thing. Let's rock them with ketamine instead,
Well, that's
which
exactly
is
what they
exciting
did.
for some people.
Yeah. Horse tranquilizer. Right.
Yeah, yeah. Um,
So instead of
and in my
addressing the pain, you're talking more about sedating, so that you're unconscious and don't feel the pain, but it's via a different mechanism.
I should clarify. We have painkillers and we have sedatives. We keep the two on different shelves. We use them in different situations. We have fentanyl, which is super morphine.
Yes.
It's the thing we're worried about the Chinese doing to us what the British did to them a couple of years ago. Um, and in reference to the Opium Wars. And then we have, on a separate shelf, we have ketamine, which we're thinking of replacing benzos with, which is nice because we can use it for pain killing, but we more so look at it as a sedative.
So there's where and is any of that driven by like, so you have somebody who maybe, like you have a lot of people who are ex-opiate addicts, right? Who will always be like, I was an opiate addict and then I was clean for 10 years and then I fell off my roof and I woke up in the hospital and I was addicted again because they were giving me Dilaudid.
And that's the interesting thing, is that there's a lot of conversation on, like, not even at the training level, but in the ambulance level of, hey, our dosage for fentanyl is 25 to 100 micrograms. This guy has a broken leg. He's saying his pain is 7 out of 10. I want to give him 70 micrograms. And someone else will go, well, let's not create an addict here. Let's give
Right.
him 25. Because if we can bring that down to a 5, I mean, I stub my toe and I'm at a 5.
Yeah.
That's normal. And then you start factoring in, oh, well, this is a black woman. They overestimate their pain so much. Maybe we shouldn't even be giving them a painkiller.
So is that, I know that traditionally like that has been an issue, right? Like
Yeah.
doctors will tend not to take women's claims of pain as seriously, or people of colors or minorities claims of pain as seriously. They will tend to assume that their tolerance for what they think is drug-seeking behavior is lower. So that goes all the way down the chain, is what you're
Oh yeah,
saying. Uh,
drug-seeking behavior is such a big word that I learned it before I learned what a trauma one center was.
hmm, hmm.
Um, and it's something that is a big philosophical divide in the emergency medicine community.
Right, right, huh? And yet, well, I don't know how much this varies state to state, but I do know that, like, most hospitals, if you go in and you say that your pain is a 10, you will get treated with painkillers, and then they'll just try and get you out of there as quickly as possible, right? And not really worry about what the long-term effects of that are. Um, so, I mean, I do have people who I know or am close with who are very much who are who are addicted to opiates and who do specifically do this kind of drug seeking behavior and will literally, I have seen, go into an emergency room, get to the triage nurse asks what their pain level is, and they'll just be like, 10. I'm like, oh, wow, your pain level's a 10. You seem very calm for your pain level. Your heart rate 72 beats a minute. Wow, that's amazing that your pain level's at a 10. Yet you're outwardly calm and your blood pressure is normal, but you're saying that your pain
And
level's a 10, right? So I don't, and yet,
it's so hard because you can't split that difference. I
right,
had severe migraines growing up, and I could be at a 10, I
yep.
could be nauseous and like I don't open my eyes. And like because I had to go to school, sometimes I would be at school like that.
But your vitals would probably present as relatively normal, right?
But above,
Um,
I mean, I'm lucky enough to be so healthy without doing too much. That I run at something like 50 beats per minute, and my blood pressure is like
oh,
below
fuck you.
100. Yeah, I know it's horrible.
I don't run that much high, but I'm on a beta blocker, so therefore
Oh, okay,
brings my heart rate down. Wow,
and
this
then
has
I come
been
in.
Nick. Or you prefer Nick? You said, right?
Sure.
Yeah, this has been fascinating. I would love to talk to you again sometime. I hope that you're around or see you around, and uh, good luck with everything that you're doing. And I wish there were more people like you doing this stuff because, like I said, you seem very thoughtful. Could all just be maybe you might be a psychopath. I don't know, but it doesn't seem that way.
It would help. It would help.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they do say, yeah, the percentage of people who go in the medical field or politics, those are the highest levels of socio or psychopaths.
Yeah,
So I don't know, but you seem nice, Nick. So,
I appreciate that.
yeah.
And there are more of us than you might think.
Oh, no,
It's
no.
just,
I
12
totally
cups of
like,
coffee. 12 cups of coffee tends to change a person.
that's true though, right? Like if you're on hour 15 of your shift, like you're not the same person that you were on hour one,
Yeah.
right? Um,
Um,
wow.
yeah. Totally want to make sure we get to other people, though. Totally get that.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Nick.
See you soon.
Yeah.
Farewell.
Good
I'll
luck.
keep
Take
watching.
care. All right. That was super, super enlightening. Um, and in mostly a good way, right? It wasn't, I guess it's funny because like I think about things, I almost always think about things in terms of the prison industrial complex. So when I think about like the system that hospitals have, the deals that they have with ambulance companies or even fire departments or whomever are bringing them patients and insurance companies, obviously, I think of it in terms of like, um, well, hospitals are not making money from somebody who is out on the street who gets hurt but maybe doesn't need hospital care. They're making money from people who are insured who are being brought to the hospital. But that's a pretty cynical way of looking at it, and I think it's probably good every once in a while to kind of have that checked by actually talking to the boots on the ground kind of people like Nick there who, I don't know, kind of do quite a bit for me and hopefully for others to like restore faith in humanity. So yeah, that was a blast. I certainly hope when I need an ambulance, that somebody like Nick is there, either at the hospital or in the ambulance itself. Okay, let's see. We're coming up on 2 hours. I'm going to take a quick bio break and then maybe take 1 or 2 more calls before wrapping it up for the night. If you're watching and you haven't subscribed, be sure to smash that subscribe button. If you want to talk, a deadsymbol@gmail.com. I will be back in a minute, and stick around. that was a great talk with Nick there. Great talk with Rebecca. I have a couple of call requests out. I'm now at the point where I'm feeling every blink. Every time I blink my eyes, I can feel the contacts. Yeah, that was, I mean, fascinating to learn that stuff and to kind of see the what goes on behind the scenes, especially when it's not too horrible. And I understand, like, there's always compromises to be made, and there's problems with outcome-based data collection, right? That's sorry. This is a bit of a side note, but does anybody have any game recommendations? I've been kind of thinking about playing Little Hope. I almost call it Little Happens because that's the name of the town in the Witch episode of Inside Number 9. But Little Hope is the sort of cinematic horror game put out by Supergiant or Supermassive Games. The people that did Until Dawn and Man of Medan. I didn't really like Man of Medan, but I'm gonna take this. Let me take this off. But I am looking for recommendations in that area. Let's take this off. Yeah, Jessica, you like that these are in-ear monitors so that I don't have to wear those giant headphones. However, they're not that comfortable. Well, I'm looking for a game that would be enjoyable to stream because the last couple that I've tried, while they've been fun to play, they haven't been like great streaming games. So I'm looking for something more like, I guess that's why Little Hope kind of appeals to me, even though it hasn't gotten great reviews. It's like 5 hours long and it's cinematic and not a lot of button smashing, hopefully not too many quick time events, time to comment on the game. Okay, we have someone in the green room right now. Goes by the name PG. So we will call them PG. I've played Oxenfree, Nick. Yeah, I did like it. I didn't finish it, but I did like it. I'm not going to play Death Stranding in a stream. I don't feel like that would be fun for people to watch. But anyway, I want to bring in PG and some interesting stuff to talk about. PG.
Hey guys.
Hey, it's good to meet you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, everything's fine.
Okay, and I think I've finally fixed the issue, I believe, where the person I was talking to was much louder than me. That's me again. Whenever there's a helicopter, I just gotta remember that it's me. That's really loud. Can you hear that?
No, not really.
Wow, it might be beneath the threshold of like hertz-wise of what people can hear. But you sent me. Hold on. Let me just give this one moment. if I suddenly disappear, it's a targeted strike. Okay, there it seems to be gone. Okay. So PG, can you? I don't know what you can tell us about where you're from, or whereabouts you're from, or what you want to reveal or not reveal. But you had mentioned something interesting in your email that I wanted to touch on. What it is that you do.
Yeah, so currently I'm a student, and so I don't get to do much of what I really like to, but the area I focus on in terms of research is recombinant DNA technology. And so that is taking DNA apart and putting it back together in different ways and inserting stuff that we want for specific aspects and traits.
So like
And
making viruses. I guess that'd be RNA, right?
he knows.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So of course that'd be RNA, and that's certainly short of as a delivery mechanism. Viruses are outside of my wheelhouse entirely. So what I like and what I focus on is algae in the ocean specifically, and as I'm sure some of you know, it's not going too great for them right now. It's
Yeah, mass deaths,
annually,
right?
right? Yeah. And so what I focus on is A, why is that happening? And B, what can we do to stop it, essentially? There's not a practical application for what I'm interested in per se, purely because releasing a genetically modified organism on that level is frowned upon currently.
Like the Simpsons
But
episode of, right, releasing the lizards to catch the flies and then the snakes to eat
right,
the lizards and then
right. Um, but it, as we get closer and closer to a point of no return, it becomes a more attractive option. Um, just because the alternative is no life at all.
right. So algae, like these giant, huge. Correct me if I'm wrong. Like this is just my very layman's understanding of these massive algae beds, right, that produce a whole lot of oxygen, right? Oxygenating the atmosphere, but also the water, right? Or is that?
Right.
Um,
Yeah. So, I mean, if you put oxygen into the atmosphere, you're going to oxygenate the water at the same time just because oxygen dissolves into water. And in terms of gas dissolving into liquid, the main problem we have now is as we drive up the levels of CO2 in the atmosphere, we allow more CO2 to dissolve into water. And that is how we're acidifying the oceans.
yeah, yeah, which makes it more acidic, right? So it's interesting because that's another, like, it's funny, like how many of these things, and how many of these talks that I have with people where just these massive blind spots, like people talk about saving the rainforests, right? And like planting trees, but right, 2/3 of the earth is ocean, right? So if there are these massive algae beds, and I don't know if you have I don't know what the statistics are as far as percentage of oxygen created by, say, algae versus trees. But I have read about like these literally like algae beds the size of a small state, right, or a city or something like that, right?
Right.
Is that accurate? And so is the amount of oxygen being produced by algae? I mean, it's obviously significant, but I guess how significant is it versus when people are always going on about deforestation?
So it's more significant in terms of the carbon they capture as opposed to the oxygen they put out. The estimates vary, but it's believed to be between 40 and 60% of carbon sequestered annually is done by algae in the oceans, and that is of course dropping as time goes on.
40 to
Um,
60% of all the carbon taken, or of all the carbon dioxide taken out of the atmosphere is done by algae.
Right.
Wow.
So
That-
that's where we got um, all of our oil reserves and stuff like that from, was this process happening with diatoms, which are still around today, but are just one of four major groups now, all of which are facing sort of unique troubles in terms of what we're doing to the planet. Um, so what I focus on is something that to me seems a lot more fixable, which is the carbon capture mechanism of algae. Essentially, they need to be able to sequester that carbon dissolved into the water so that they can actually use it for something. And in order to do that, they need to create a basic environment within their carbon capture mechanism. So as the acidity of the ocean goes up, to maintain the same pH inside that carbon capture mechanism, the energy they have to put into doing that goes up. And that's energy that's not going towards growth. And so overall, you see lower biomass.
So it's a vicious cycle, right?
Right.
The water's getting more acidic. They're capturing less carbon because they have to expend more energy to exist in a more acidic environment. And on it goes until everything's dead, right? Is it?
Right. And so there's a few other aspects to it, which are that in almost all of the large players in terms of ocean algae are experiencing an issue in a lot of them form shells around themselves, either with silica or with bicarbonates. And of course, acidity is, in the case of bicarbonate shells, breaking them down. And in the case of silica shells, it's not entirely clear what's going on there, but these shells are becoming malformed. And in both cases, obviously, that leads to death for the organism.
So you're talking about rapid evolutionary mechanisms that the algae are undergoing to try and combat these changing conditions, and they're not able to be successful naturally.
So in that case, they're not. No real successful evolution has happened there. That's just an example of how, or the many ways in which they're dying off. There's also a very complex one, which is essentially that they're more vulnerable to heat stress. And what that means is that occasionally they'll have a photon enter that is higher energy than photons they're used to dealing with. And how well they can handle that now depends on the warmth and the acidity of the water. And the less they're able to manage that, the more likely that is to accelerate damage to them. So it's just, everything is bad for them right now.
Wow. So is one of the things that you're looking into, or maybe you're not working on it yet, right? But maybe this is something that you're working towards, is using recombinant technology to essentially, I don't want to say create superalgae, but create algae that can adapt to more acidic and acidic situations, just harsher environments, right? Because
Right.
that's what they're being exposed to right now, and they're not proliferating.
Right. So in terms of the one I'd be modifying, it's boy, the names of these are hard to say. Wow, Prolochleocurus marinus.
Oh yeah, that one.
Yeah, so it's one of the best or the most well-researched. Its genome has been entirely sequenced, and it's also an incredibly abundant algae. And in the case of that particular type of algae, the main obstacle it faces is the issue with the carbon capture mechanism. And so there's another, it was unclear if this was a protist or a eukaryote back when I was looking into this, but there's a paper that came out on October 7th that I've been meaning to read that should clear that up. But it goes by the name marine amoeba thermophilia, which is because it lives underwater and it lives in areas around 50 degrees Celsius.
And just for everybody listening, so the difference between a prokaryotic and a eukaryotic organism is?
So the presence of a nucleus in this case is the issue we have. And there's also some stuff in terms of going back and forth between exchanging genetic code in them. There are a few procedures that need to be done that I won't get into that are, it complicates the whole thing pretty much. But
some of the stuff that you're talking about, like when you're talking about diatoms and these sort of very simple one-celled organisms creating shells around themselves, or are any, again, this is just my sort of like very surface level knowledge of evolution, but my surface level knowledge of evolution is that is essentially how multicellular organisms ended up coming about, right? Was single-celled organisms enveloping other organisms and eventually becoming symbiotic with other organisms and creating colonies that were then gestalt or became gestalt and were able to reproduce in a way that mirrored what they were, right? Is that incorrect, what I just said? Is that?
No, but in this case, the issue is when I talk about them having shells around themselves, it's a non-living extracellular matrix. So it's not like in the case of, God, what's it called? And forgetting my cellular machinery. The mitochondria, where we think it was consumed by one organism and then there's a symbiotic relationship here, because at that point it had actually been enveloped into the membrane of another organism. But in this case, with the
this is non-organic material. It's
right.
Okay.
And I
so
suppose
it's actually like built. Sorry. Go ahead. I don't want to.
Right. I mean, I suppose if you had enough of them in one place, you could end up in a situation where they end up sticking themselves together, but they tend to just be completely separate from each other. And you can think of it as your bones are individual living cells in a cellular matrix. So if these organisms were to bond together for some reason, it would be a similar situation where they're all attached and inside the same thing, but they're not really. In the case of bone, they do interact, but in this case, they wouldn't really be interacting with each other.
So this sounds to me like it would be pretty high priority whenever it would be considered pretty high priority by any government entity that recognizes climate change and or well, let's just say climate change as something that. Well, now wait a minute. So I guess, do we know what the loop is that's starting these sort of mass algae deaths? Like, is there?
So ocean acidification, which is just as we
Right.
raise the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, more of it is able to dissolve into water. And so the loop there would be that every year there are less algae to pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And so for that year, the ratio of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is higher than the previous year, which would create increased acidity.
Why do you think, maybe it's just me, but why do you think the attention, why do you think trees get all the attention?
Because it is incredibly easy to convince people that global warming will go away if we plant enough trees, and it won't.
And people like trees. Like algae is not something
Right.
that people are like, ooh, algae is really cool. You can climb it and it's beautiful and all that kind of stuff, right? So there's not a real human connection with algae, right?
Right. So I have absolutely no evidence to back this, but my feeling on a lot of these campaigns to plant a lot of trees is that it would make sense for a fossil fuel company to back one of those efforts to engender complacency in terms of just we can plan our way out of this. And carbon dioxide, the amount we produce and how long it stays up in the atmosphere, it does need to come back down from high up in the atmosphere in order for trees to get at it. So it's not a great solution, because if we end up kicking off other feedback loops before then, which we will because we don't have 20 years, then it doesn't really do anything. And the main concern I have there is that two things. One is a blue ocean event in the northern hemisphere, which would be bad, essentially.
What's a blue ocean event? Is that an algae-free?
Right. So that one has nothing to do with algae, not directly.
Okay.
But what it is that essentially we have the polar ice caps that are melting every year and refreezing every year. And it takes a lot more energy to melt ice than it does to warm up water. So when we eventually reach the year where all of them melt, then instead of any energy past that point, instead of going into melting ice, is going to go into raising the water temperature. And that gets progressively worse to a point, and it's just a lot harder to come back from. And the concern would be that would be kicked off by methane release from permafrost. I don't know if you're aware, but about 7 months ago, we had a persistent temperature anomaly over Eastern Europe in excess of 40 degrees Celsius, right over the largest amount of permafrost trapped methane on the planet. And we also saw methane levels in the region increase more in 6 months than they had in 4 years. So we're not in a great situation. And it does seem like we're kind of at a point where we need a nuclear option in terms of reversing things. And there is, prior to my idea, there is something else we can do that is not as extreme. And that is that currently, for algae in the ocean, bioavailable iron is the limiting nutrient. And so if we were to dump large amounts of that into the ocean, we could, in theory, create very large algal blooms to consume a large amount of CO2.
You said algal blooms. So just large proliferating events of algae just blooming, right? That's what that.
Right. I mean, you need to be careful about where you disperse stuff at the same time, because you don't want to create a dead zone out of the entire ocean, which is something you could probably manage if you could grow that much algae at once.
So growing that much algae and possibly the amount of iron that would need to be put into the water might kill other life forms, but would be optimal for algae.
Right. So algae, when it's growing, is great. The problem is if a lot of it dies at the same time, then when it's broken down by decomposers, it releases a lot of dissolved carbon dioxide into the water. And that's what you hear talked about with dead zones and algal blooms, where essentially
Gotcha.
There is such a high concentration of carbon dioxide in the water that things that
Nothing
usually
can
live
live.
there just can't.
Yeah. And that's often caused by dying algae, right?
Right. And so, I mean, most commonly, if you look at the Gulf of Mexico, or really any river outlet from the heartland, the fertilizers we use get swept off into the runoff, and then those come out into the ocean and create algal blooms. Probably you've heard Florida has been struggling with red algae. That was a story earlier in the year. And that's all because of farming that's being done there. I forget specifically what type of farming it was, but anywhere that you have agricultural refuse flowing out into a body of water, you're going to get algal blooms, because fertilizer, of course, has everything that algae love in it.
Right. That makes sense, right? So it's not just about making more algae. It's a method of creating it or making it proliferate in controlled areas and in controlled amounts, right? Is that what we're saying here?
If we're going with the bioavailable iron method, yes. If we're going with just releasing a modified strain of algae with an unnaturally high level of fitness for its environment, there's not really much you can do in terms of determining where that goes and what that does.
Right. It would get everywhere. Right?
Have you played the game Frostpunk?
No, I did play Last of Us. Seemed to be a lot of plant life. I know that's more fungal than algae.
So I don't.
Frostpunk, no, I didn't.
Frostpunk is just an example as an environment. Basically, there's been several ice ages on the planet attributed to algae, because when you pull carbon dioxide and other stuff out of the atmosphere and you pump up the oxygen level, it gets a lot harder for the Earth to store heat. And then at that point, everything ends up getting frozen. That kills off algae. And then, it's a cycle. But that, I don't know the last time that happened, actually. But there's at least 2 events of that I was taught about.
But are you saying that all ice ages were caused by this? Is that?
Not all ice ages. We just know that there are likely to have been at least 2 caused by it.
So what would I mean, I guess what it comes down to is, right, is you're saying like the amount of methane that's captured in permafrost being released to the atmosphere. Like some of this stuff sounds like maybe it's stuff that humans had something to do with, but maybe humans can't really stop necessarily. Like
Right. So that's really the core of the problem with methane, is that it's 200 times worse than CO2, and it degrades into CO2. So it does get better after 30 to 40 years, but not much better. And if you can start one feedback loop, and I would argue methane is probably the worst feedback loop, if you can just start that one, then I guess we can find out if all the other proposed ones are real or not. There's stuff about release of methane from the ocean floor, and there's a few others, but really it would be better if we could just get things under control in the next 5 years, because I think if we really start the methane feedback loop, there's not any coming back from that.
But I know like farming obviously is a huge source of methane released into the atmosphere, but how huge is it like when you compare it to stuff like this permafrost release of methane into the atmosphere? I guess what I'm wondering is it already too late? Like, are we going to have to resort to something, in your opinion, nuclear, as you were saying, right? Like some drastic. Go ahead.
In terms of if it's already too late, there's some debate on that. Recently, there was some testing done on permafrost that showed melt 70 years ahead of where it was supposed to be based on the models. So there's a lot of news articles that like to talk about climate change in terms of what we'll see in 2100. I think we're going to see a lot of that prior to 2100. Really the methane feedback loop is the biggest problem here. And I just don't see, particularly the level released a few months ago and just the short time over which that was released, I don't really see a way that we come back from this.
But was that a natural process that by which that methane was captured?
That was just permafrost? That was just from permafrost.
Okay.
Our methane contributions are really hard to track because, of course, nobody wants the government measuring that. But compared to a feedback loop releasing methane from permafrost, the way people talk about having that feedback loop conclude is with us having a Venus-like atmosphere. It really, the amount of methane there, if it all gets released, is completely catastrophic.
Right. Yeah. Clouds of hydrochloric acid. Crazy. Obviously inhospitable to any form of life as we know it, right?
Right.
Wow. Well, are you going to fix?
Unfortunately,
Grace makes
the
a good point here,
reality
right?
is Right. So you could say that my research is for posterity, really, and that my hope would be that so the organism I'm looking at transferring the carbon capture mechanism from, and hopefully other characteristics, it survives at pHs just well below anything else. I don't have the exact figure with me here. And it also doesn't have to photosynthesize. It's capable of gaining energy through chemosynthesis. But largely
Chemosynthesis,
we'd be
I don't know what
looking
that is.
so that's gaining energy through chemical reactions.
Okay.
So like,
I should have been able to put the prefix and
right.
suffix together. But
So that's when they talk about all those microbes that live around hydrothermal vents,
oh, right. Yes.
in the depths of the ocean. Those are all doing chemosynthesis just because, yeah. But the idea here is that the oceans would have to get to 50 degrees Celsius before this dies off. And hopefully things don't progress that badly that quickly. But really, in terms of actually doing anything, we're going to have to wait until somehow capitalism decides that climate change is something that needs to be dealt with, just because I don't see us pulling it together to do the right thing.
It's strange because a lot of that attention seems to be like centered on the people that are anti, say, doing stuff about climate change will often frame it in terms of, well, this is a natural process. It's not our fault. One, I mean, you could be wrong, right? But two, who cares if it's our fault? Who cares if like you're saying, like if there's these giant releases of methane into the atmosphere that's coming from permafrost that we can't really do anything about, or we can't stop it from happening, and we didn't say put it there, right? Like it isn't something that we directly did. That's the direct sort of result of industrialization or something like that. But we still got to deal with it, right? Like we still have to do something about it if we want to have a hope of any sort of longevity on this planet, right? So to me, that was always like very strange. It's because the argument is always like, is this man-made climate change or is it not? Well, does it fucking matter if it's man-made or not? If it's going to end all life on the planet, who cares if it was man-made or not? If we can do something to stop it, we need to do something to stop it or curtail it or buy us as much time as we possibly can, right? So that maybe we can, who knows, like find some kind. I guess it's alarming to me to like hear that, and I know I say this phrase a lot, but this false dichotomy of it's either climate change is caused by humans and we have to do something to fix it, or it's just a cyclical part of nature and we can just kind of go along for the ride and everything's going to be cool, right? Cool, everything's going to be warm, right? But it's not that cut and dried from what you're saying, and obviously from other sources as well. But you don't sound like you're that hopeful for the future of mankind.
No. So there's a few problems that I see. One, I'll go with the most controversial first. There are certain people who believe that pretty soon the world is supposed to end. And one of those people is our AG here in the States.
Oh, Billy?
Yeah. Both he and Mike Pence are Dominionist. And if you've ever been confused about the Republican Party's support for Israel, they're the reason. Because according to the doctrine, all of the Jews need to return to the Holy Land for there to be a final war and for Jesus to come back. So these kinds of people are not interested in saving the world because for them it needs to end. And there's unfortunately a lot of them who hold positions of power in the United States government. And while I do think the United States needs to curtail its domestic interference, we are a country that needs to, if not lead on climate change, then at least get its shit together and get on the same team as other people. And in terms of our consumption and emissions, even if everyone else does everything they can, we can still kind of sink this ship on our own. And there's a lot of countries politically that are in positions similar to ours right now, where there's been a rise of authoritarian rhetoric. And as a result, climate causes have gone by the wayside.
Yeah. And some of those have been emboldened by the example set by the United States, right?
Right. No, I think this, in terms of whether we should or deserve the spotlight, we do have it. And unfortunately, when we make light of certain issues, then a lot of other people don't take them seriously.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it seems like in the perspective of all the things that we've been discussing over the last 20 or 30 minutes, the fact that I guess we can take some small solace in the fact that Trump was voted out, but it seems like so much has to happen. There just seems to be like, it has to be such a massive global undertaking that it does seem a little daunting. And I do wonder, like, if we end up getting to the point where it's like, we'll try anything now, right? Like, you want to create, do something that's essentially a virus that's hopefully might create algae that can survive in acidic situations and capture more carbon dioxide and maybe stop this loop in some way. Who knows what it's actually going to do, on a global level. It may change the ecosystem entirely, right? It may cause mass extinctions and all this kind of stuff, but maybe it won't be as bad as, say, all the oxygen in the atmosphere rushing away into space, or just disappearing, and or the temperature rising to the point where we just can't exist. I wonder what point we have to get to start considering those kinds of options as not being hey, but what about Jurassic Park? Remember Jurassic Park? They did that thing and it didn't turn out well, right? Like that kind of aversion to experimental science, which I understand that too, right? But at some point it becomes like, what's the lesser of two evils? What's gonna kill us slower, right?
Right. And that's why I think really the bioavailable iron method would be pretty pursued before anything like I am suggesting.
It sounds innocuous compared to like anything. I mean, if you just bring up, manufacturing DNA or recombinant DNA and like creating a new life form or an altered, essentially like a GMO life form, right? That would handle this for us. You get that whole sort of Pandora's box stuff being thrown up. I don't know what to say except you've opened my eyes, and I thought I was a pretty liberal, kind of Green New Deal kind of person, but like not even sort of. It's true. Like I haven't really taken into account. I have been one of those plant trees kinds of person, right? And that is maybe, like you said, I wouldn't be surprised if there is an element of this is not going to be enough to make any difference, but it's something that we can do so that in the time that we have, we can party it up still, Oops. I just lost my internet connection. Sorry about that, PG. The stream just cut off for me. I think it's back on now. But yeah, I just wanted to thank you for like talking about this stuff, and if there's anything that you want to say, or like any advice you have, or like anything you think that people could do, right? Like it just seems like in the face of such a massive thing, like write your senator, right? It doesn't really,
Yeah,
it's not going to move the needle. Like, is there anything we can do to move the needle?
I would say, I mean, write your senators, maybe not, but definitely vote for them. Local elections, every level you can. Um, I do. I vote by mail, just so you can go through and research everyone beforehand and know exactly who you're voting for. Going vegan is certainly something you can do, and I think more than the climate impact of that is the amount of water you're saving with going vegan, just because the insane amount of water we use to process meat. And so, I mean, if it's something you can do, and you don't have to go full vegan, you can just cut out certain things. You can switch from red meat to chicken, that sort of stuff. But ultimately, change does have to come from the top if it's going to mean anything at all. Um, yeah.
Can you help me out real quick when you say like not wasting water? Do you, do you know what the process is with water waste that actually causes a problem? Because I think that's something I've had trouble wrapping my head around, because to me it just seems like, well, how can you waste water? Like, even if you consume it, it ends up going back into the, like, the H2O comes back out, right?
Right. So the there's a couple ones. California, for example, gets a ton of its water from aquifers, which are areas under the ground that have been filled with water through having a clay layer above them that water is able to seep down through, and then it gets trapped underneath in a different, less dense layer. And California is depleting their aquifers faster than those aquifers recharge. So essentially, the water they're using has, exceeded what is sustainable. And I'm not an expert on California. This is just what I've been told about it. So depletion of aquifers is one issue. The other issue is tied to global warming, in that a lot of fresh water sources come from snowpack. They start up in the mountains. You have the river coming down, and if you have a shorter period of time in which it's snowing, you have less snowpack and you have less fresh water overall. But in terms of what I was talking about with being a vegetarian or a vegan, um, meat requires lots and lots of water to process, in terms of the amount of water that the cow needs to consume while growing up, um, versus the amount of water needed to grow vegetables.
Right. Okay. Okay. Yeah, that clears it up a bit for me, because I guess, yeah, like I said, I'm one of those people who, well, I,
When I say waste water, I'm really talking about wasting like fresh water, which I should have been more specific with. Um, Wastewater, whole other thing to talk about. But yeah, I feel like we should get somebody else on here. It's been a minute.
I think I'm gonna wrap up the stream shortly after you, because I'm at the point now where it feels like my contacts are about to pop out. But I did want to talk for a minute or two afterwards, just to kind of wrap things up. But PG, thank you so much for talking about this stuff, and for, you know, keeping the faith, I want to say, I don't know, like, when you're staring down the barrel of this stuff every day, um, does it, last question, right? um, like, I would imagine there are days where you feel like, oh, well, this is just hopeless. What am I doing? And then days where you feel like, well, no, I'm definitely gonna, I'm gonna keep with it. Like, what do you do to keep yourself, to keep yourself uh, motivated in the face of so much, like, so many complex systems, that just seems like it's going to be really, really tough to, well, I keep saying the phrase move the needle, but move the needle. Like, how do you do that?
So you would think that coming to terms with the, being in a state of mind where you think it is likely that the world is coming to an end would be a very crushing thing. But what has been described to me by colleagues and by other people, who work in similar fields is that things like the wildfires in Australia and California, finally seeing the vindication that what you've been saying is right and that this is actually happening, while that is horrible, at the same time, it feels like you've been getting gaslit for decades and all of a sudden that's gone because you're able to know with absolute certainty that, this is happening. So I wouldn't say that I'm really bothered by it that much at all, because it's a situation that either that I don't think can be changed, but if it can be changed, then that's fantastic. And so it's hard for me to really be upset about it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know what to say. That like, it seems like it's such a big thing that it's one of those deals where avoidance is the only way for your brain to, or for me, for my brain to sort of deal with the reality. It would be to sort of compartmentalize it and put it somewhere like back here a little bit. So I'm not thinking about it 24/7, and it doesn't just create this sort of despair loop, right? So yeah, I'm glad that obviously I'm glad that we had this conversation. I feel like, people are probably really generally uncomfortable and don't want to have those kind of conversations, and that's probably one of the reasons why these things are not pushed forward more, or they want to have some kind of simple solution that's also they can also put a nice face on, for example, which we're talking about, like with trees. So all I can say is I keep doing the good work that you're doing, and yeah, if we all die, you'll be proved right. It'll be some small consolation. That
My thoughts on it, or at least what I concluded, is for me, I don't think there's any sort of afterlife. I think it's just
Mhm.
an in or out. So I was like that for 13 billion years
Yeah,
before being alive,
yeah,
and you're just going back to that.
yeah. I'm
It's
familiar
too
with
bad.
this with this philosophy of thinking about, well, you've been, for the overwhelming majority of the existence of the universe, you did not exist. Now you exist for a little while and then you don't exist again. So why are you so concerned about, not existing, going back to the state where you were for all of this time? The difference is you didn't know, right? Like that.
Right.
For
And
me,
it,
it's
it
like,
really, from this position, it really does feel like, you know, being a popular kid at a party telling a nervous kid to just go and talk to the girl he likes. It's just so easy. Just go up and talk to her. But it's because I'm already in this state of mind that I can talk about it as being something that is so simple and so easy.
because you've bought a house there. Like that's where you live, right?
Right, right.
Yeah. Mm. That's fascinating, PG, and thank you very much for coming on and talking about this. And I've seen you around quite a bit, so thank you for even like hanging out and just being in the chat. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem, man. This has been good.
Cool. Thank you very much for talking, and good luck to us all. All right, take care, PG.
Bye.
Okay, before my voice goes completely and guys, we're all gonna die, but just take a moment to listen to that. What's that, you ask? What am I doing? What is this thing that I'm opening and closing in front of the microphone that's making this beautiful, relaxing sound? Look, this is why we need ASMR more than ever. It's because please remain calm. There's nothing you can do. Well, so the Ridge wallet is carbon fiber. So it will withstand temperatures of I have no freaking idea. I don't know that carbon fiber is actually all that resistant to temperature. I know it's the most durable substance created by man, but I don't know what that means as far as... Look, if you're worried about stuff, just all the thought... That's embarrassing. All the bad thoughts that you're having, you just open it and you just put the thoughts in there. Oh, that's my. Can I show you my driver's license? Would that would probably not be wise, would it? I can show you my driver's license picture. See if it's not focusing, but there you go. Yeah, so just remember, bury all your worries and all your existential dread as deeply as you can, and try to continue existing in spite of it. Like, do it like just to show it who's boss. Like, you can't tell me what to do, you know? Oh my God, carbon fiber can withstand up to 400 degrees. That's amazing. The credit cards definitely can't. So you'd just be left with this empty wallet. And I'm guessing the actual part about this wallet that I like, which is the little stretchy bits, I'm guessing those go the moment you hit 250 degrees. There you go. All right. Thank you all for coming by tonight. I'm sorry for anyone I didn't get to. I'm just too tired at this point to keep going. But I am looking for a game to restart up a gaming stream on this channel. So if I don't hear a lot from you, I'm probably going to go with Little Hope because I like the name. And I hope everybody has a good night and or morning. And I wish I were, I'm not vegan, but oh boy, everybody do what you can, and, don't, try not to give up, I know it's hard, and I'll see you all and talk to you all again soon, and take care of each other, because we probably don't have long, so at least we can be nice, and and of course, smash that subscribe button, and I will see you